My son took the whole family to celebrate his promotion at a restaurant, everything except me. My daughter-in-law said, "Don't forget to finish the leftovers in the fridge." I replied, "Okay." Then I quietly packed my bags, wrote a letter, and left it on the table. The next day, when they came home and saw what was inside, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Edward, and I'm 63 years old. For the past 5 years, I've been living in what used to be my own home. But somewhere along the way, I became nothing more than an unpaid housekeeper. I should have seen it coming, but when you love your family, you make excuses for behavior that you'd never tolerate from strangers." It was a Tuesday evening in March when everything finally became crystal clear. Albert, my 34-year-old son, burst through the front door with that grin he gets when something good happens at work. His wife Sadie followed behind him, already on her phone, probably posting something on social media about their latest achievement. "Dad, guess what?" Albert said, loosening his tie as he walked into the living room where I was reading the newspaper. "I got the promotion, senior project manager, effective immediately." I felt a genuine surge of pride. Despite everything, Albert was still my son, and I wanted him to succeed. I stood up, ready to congratulate him properly, maybe suggest we order dinner from that Italian place he used to love as a kid. "That's wonderful, son. I'm so proud of you," I said, reaching out to shake his hand. Albert grinned and pulled out his phone. "Thanks, Dad. I'm calling everyone right now. We're going to Romano's tonight to celebrate. The whole family's coming." My heart lifted. Romano's was that upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place we used to go for special occasions when my wife Margaret was still alive. I started thinking about what I'd wear, whether I should shower first, maybe iron my good shirt. That's when Sadie walked over, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor I'd just mopped that morning. She had that look on her face, the one that made my stomach tighten with dread. "Oh, Edward," she said, her voice syrupy sweet in that way that always preceded something cruel. "You don't need to worry about getting ready or anything. This is really just for immediate family." I blinked, not understanding. "I'm sorry?" Albert was already dialing his sister Jennifer's number, completely absorbed in his phone call. Sadie smiled that plastic smile of hers and continued, "You know, people who are actually part of Albert's success story. His real support system." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there feeling my face flush with embarrassment and confusion. "But I am family. I'm his father." Sadie's smile never wavered. "Of course you are, but let's be realistic here. This is about Albert's career, his future with his real family. You understand?" I wanted to argue, to remind her that I'd paid for Albert's college education, that I'd supported him through his failed startup, that I'd been there for every milestone of his life. But the words stuck in my throat like they always did when Sadie spoke to me like this. Albert finished his call and walked back over, his face glowing with excitement. "Jennifer and Tom are meeting us there at 7. Mike and Lisa too. Oh, and Sadie's parents said they'll drive down from Sacramento." "That's great," I managed to say, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Sadie stepped closer to me and I caught a whiff of her expensive perfume, the kind that cost more than my monthly medication budget. "Edward, while we're out celebrating, could you do me a tiny favor?" She didn't wait for my answer. "Don't forget to finish eating those leftovers in the refrigerator. I'd hate for them to go bad while we're having our family dinner." The way she said family dinner felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I looked at Albert, waiting for him to say something, to correct his wife, to remind her that I was his father and deserved to be included. But he was already heading upstairs to change clothes, completely oblivious to what had just happened. "The leftover meatloaf should be enough for you," Sadie continued, checking her manicured nails. "And there's some of that canned soup you like in the pantry. Much more appropriate for someone your age anyway." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't the first time Sadie had made comments like this, but something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the casual cruelty of it, the way she dismissed me while my son celebrated just 15 feet away. Maybe it was the realization that Albert hadn't even thought to include me in his celebration. "Okay," I said quietly, because that's what I always said. That's what I'd been saying for 5 years. Sadie's smile brightened. "You're such an understanding man, Edward. That's what I've always appreciated about you. You know your place." "Know my place? In my own home. The home I'd bought with my late wife 32 years ago. The home where I'd changed Albert's diapers and helped him with homework and taught him to drive in the driveway that I still shoveled every winter." I watched them get ready for their celebration. Albert came downstairs looking sharp in the suit I'd bought him for Christmas. Sadie had changed into a red dress that probably cost more than my Social Security check. They laughed and joked as they gathered their things, completely comfortable with leaving me behind like an old piece of furniture. "We'll probably be late," Albert called out as they headed for the door. "Don't wait up." The door closed behind them with a soft click, and suddenly the house felt enormous and empty. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to Albert's car pull out of the driveway. Through the window, I watched their taillights disappear down the street, taking them toward a celebration that apparently had no place for me. I walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. There was the leftover meatloaf Sadie had mentioned, sitting in a plastic container with my name written on it in her careful handwriting. Like I was a child who might forget which food was mine, like I was a tenant in my own home who needed labels to remember what I was allowed to eat. That's when it hit me, the full weight of what my life had become. I wasn't Albert's father anymore. I wasn't the head of this household. I was the help. I was the old man who cooked and cleaned and paid bills and kept his mouth shut while the real family lived their lives around me. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Margaret and I had shared thousands of meals, where we'd helped Albert with his science projects, where we'd planned our dreams for retirement that never came. Now I was sitting there alone, holding a container of leftovers, while my son celebrated his success with everyone except me. For the first time in 5 years, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my anger, and as I sat there in that quiet kitchen, I made a decision that would change everything. Sitting alone in that kitchen, with their celebration laughter still echoing in my ears, my mind drifted back to how it all began. It wasn't sudden, this erosion of my place in my own family. It happened so gradually that I barely noticed until I was already invisible. Margaret died 6 years ago, after a brutal fight with cancer that lasted 18 months. During those final weeks, Albert was finishing his master's degree and could only visit on weekends. I understood. I held her hand through the chemo treatments, drove her to every appointment, and held her when she cried from the pain. When she died on that gray November morning, I thought the worst was behind me. Albert met Sadie 2 months after his mother's funeral. He brought her to Sunday dinner, and I remember trying so hard to like her. She was polite enough, asking about Margaret's garden and complimenting the roast I'd learned to cook from watching my wife for 37 years. But there was something in her eyes when she looked around our modest home, a calculating quality that made me uncomfortable. "Your father seems very self-sufficient," I overheard her tell Albert one evening when they thought I was upstairs. "It's nice that he can take care of himself." That should have been my first warning. The changes started small. Albert began canceling our traditional Saturday morning breakfasts, the ones we'd shared since he was 12 years old. "Sadie and I have plans," became his standard excuse. Then it was missing our monthly fishing trips, something we'd done together since he could hold a rod. When they got engaged after dating for only 8 months, Sadie suggested they move in with me temporarily to save money for their wedding. I agreed immediately. The house felt so empty without Margaret, and I thought having them there would help fill the silence. That was my second mistake. At first, things seemed normal enough. I cooked dinner most nights because I enjoyed it and because Sadie claimed she was still learning. Albert would praise my meals and tell Sadie she was lucky to have such a good cook around. But gradually, the praise stopped and the expectations grew. "Edward makes the best pot roast" became, "Edward, we're having the Johnsons over for dinner Saturday. You'll handle the cooking, right?" "Dad's really good at keeping house" became, "The bathroom needs cleaning, Edward." I left the supplies on the counter. I told myself it was temporary. They were young and busy with their careers. I was retired and had the time. I was helping family, the way Margaret would have wanted me to. The wedding was lovely, though I barely felt like more than a guest. Sadie had very specific ideas about everything, and my opinions weren't solicited. I paid for the flowers, a $3,000 expense that wiped out most of my savings from that month, because Albert mentioned they were struggling with costs. "Just until we get on our feet, Dad," he'd said. "You understand." After the wedding, I expected them to move out. They talked about finding their own place, maybe a small apartment downtown, but every time I brought it up, there was a new excuse. Sadie was starting a new job and needed to save money. Albert was waiting for a promotion. The housing market was terrible. Months turned into years, and slowly I stopped being the homeowner and became the live-in help. It happened so gradually that I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it shifted. Maybe it was when Sadie started leaving me grocery lists with specific instructions about what to buy and how much to spend. Maybe it was when Albert stopped asking if I wanted to join them for dinner out and started assuming I'd prefer to stay home. Or maybe it was the day Sadie handed me a cleaning schedule she'd typed up on her computer, complete with daily tasks and weekly deep cleaning requirements. "I thought this might help you stay organized," she'd said with that bright smile. "You know how important it is to maintain standards. Standards in my own home, as if I hadn't been maintaining this house for over 30 years. I started noticing other things too, how they'd have long conversations about their friends, their work, their plans, but the moment I tried to contribute, the conversation would shift or die entirely. How Sadie would rearrange furniture or throw away my belongings without asking, claiming she was updating the decor. How Albert stopped coming to me for advice and started treating me like an aging relative who needed to be managed rather than respected. The worst part was how my own son seemed to forget who I was. Albert began introducing me to new people as my father who lives with us instead of my father in whose home we live. The distinction might seem small, but it changed everything about how people saw me and how I saw myself. I remember the day I realized I'd become completely invisible. Albert's college friend Michael came to visit, and they spent the entire evening discussing their careers, their investments, their futures. I sat in my own living room, listening to them talk about me as if I wasn't there. "It's great that your dad can help around the house," Michael said. "My parents are getting older too, and I worry about how they'll manage when they can't take care of themselves anymore." Albert nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, it works out well. He keeps busy with the cooking and cleaning, and we help with the bills and maintenance. It's a good arrangement for everyone." A good arrangement. As if my paying the mortgage and utilities while cooking their meals and cleaning their messes was somehow charity on their part. But I said nothing. I'd learned that speaking up only resulted in hurt feelings and accusations that I was being difficult. It was easier to stay quiet, to accept whatever scraps of respect they were willing to give me. The money situation was perhaps the most painful part. I'd always been good with finances, careful and responsible. After Margaret died, I'd hoped to travel a little. Maybe visit my sister in Oregon or take that train trip across the country we'd always talked about. Instead, I found myself subsidizing my son's lifestyle while being treated like hired help in my own home. When Albert's car broke down, I paid the $2,000 repair bill without being asked for reimbursement. When Sadie wanted new furniture for the living room, I somehow ended up financing the $4,000 sectional that I wasn't even allowed to sit on when they had company. "It's an investment in the family home," Sadie would say when these expenses came up. "You understand the value of maintaining property values. The family home, my home, the home that was still in my name, that I still paid taxes on, that I still maintained and insured and worried about. But somehow, in their minds, it had become communal property where I was the lowest-ranking member." Tonight's exclusion from Albert's promotion celebration wasn't an aberration. It was the logical conclusion of 5 years of gradual erasure. I'd been edited out of my own family, reduced to a supporting character in my own life story. As I sat there with that container of leftover meatloaf, I realized something that both terrified and liberated me. I had choices. I didn't have to accept this. I didn't have to smile and say, "Okay," when my daughter-in-law treated me like the help. I didn't have to pretend that being excluded from my own son's celebration was acceptable. For the first time in 5 years, I allowed myself to imagine what my life could look like if I stopped being so understanding, so accommodating, so grateful for whatever crumbs of affection they threw my way. And as that thought took hold, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. What I haven't told you yet is that while Albert and Sadie were out celebrating his promotion, I wasn't just sitting in that kitchen feeling sorry for myself. I was executing a plan I'd been working on for the past 6 months, ever since the day Sadie told me I needed to contribute more meaningfully to the household by taking over all the grocery shopping, cooking, and cleaning. That was the day I started seeing a lawyer. His name was Robert Chen, and his office was in a modest building downtown, far enough from our neighborhood that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I'd found him through a recommendation from my doctor, who'd noticed I'd been losing weight and seemed stressed during my last physical. "Are you being mistreated at home, Edward?" Dr. Martinez had asked gently. Sometimes adult children can become demanding when they live with aging parents. I'd laughed it off at the time, but he slipped me Robert's business card anyway. "Just in case you ever need someone to talk to about your options," he'd said. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage to call. Robert was younger than I expected, maybe in his 40s, with kind eyes and a way of listening that reminded me of my late wife. During our first meeting, I explained my situation, feeling foolish and disloyal as I described how I'd become a servant in my own home. "Edward," he said after I finished. What you're describing is a form of elder abuse. It's more common than you might think. Elder abuse. The words hit me like a cold slap. I'd never thought of it that way, but hearing it said out loud made something click into place. What are my options? I'd asked. That's when Robert explained something that shocked me. The house was entirely in my name. When Margaret and I had bought it 32 years ago, we'd put it in my name alone because I had better credit. After she died, I'd never added Albert to the deed, despite Sadie's hints that I should consider the family's future security. You have more power than you realize, Robert had told me. This is your property. You can make decisions about it without anyone's permission. Over the next several months, Robert helped me understand my financial situation better than I had in years. I wasn't just scraping by on Social Security like Albert and Sadie assumed. I had Margaret's life insurance money, still mostly untouched. I had my pension from 38 years at the electric company. I had savings and investments that I'd been too depressed to pay attention to after Margaret died. Most importantly, I had a house worth approximately $420,000 in today's market. You could sell this house tomorrow and have enough money to live comfortably anywhere you want, Robert had explained. You could buy something smaller, maybe in a senior community, and have money left over for travel, hobbies, whatever you want to do with your retirement. The idea had seemed impossible at first. This was the family home. This was where Albert grew up, where Margaret and I built our life together. How could I sell it? But as the months passed and the disrespect continued to escalate, I began to see the house differently. It wasn't a family home anymore. It was a prison where I'd volunteered to be the unpaid staff. 3 months ago, I'd made my decision. I listed the house with a real estate agent in the next county, someone who wouldn't know Albert or Sadie. I'd been showing it on weekdays when they were at work, telling them I was at the doctor or running errands. The house sold in 6 weeks. Tonight, while they celebrated Albert's promotion at Romano's, I wasn't just packing my clothes. I was executing the final phase of a plan that would give me my life back. I walked through each room of the house, taking only what was truly mine. My clothes, my books, my photo albums, the watch Margaret had given me for our 25th anniversary. I left behind all the furniture Sadie had picked out, all the expensive electronics Albert had insisted we needed, all the things that had transformed my home into their showcase. I packed everything into 3 suitcases and loaded them into my car. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and began writing the letter I'd been composing in my mind for months. Albert and Sadie, I wrote. By the time you read this, I will be gone. The house has been sold. The closing was yesterday, and the new owners take possession tomorrow morning. Your belongings need to be removed by 9 a.m. I paused, imagining their faces when they read those words. Part of me felt guilty, but a larger part felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. You have been living in my house for 5 years, I continued. During that time, I have paid the mortgage, utilities, insurance, property taxes, and maintenance costs. I have cooked your meals, cleaned your messes, and subsidized your lifestyle while being treated like hired help in my own home. My hand was shaking slightly as I wrote, but I kept going. Albert, I raised you to be a better man than this. I supported your education, your career, your dreams, and your marriage. In return, you have allowed your wife to treat me with contempt while you stood by and said nothing. You have excluded me from family celebrations, dismissed my opinions, and made me feel unwelcome in my own home. I stopped writing and looked around the kitchen one more time. Tomorrow morning, this would all belong to the Hendersons, a young couple with 2 small children who'd fallen in love with the house's character and warmth. They'd promised to take good care of Margaret's garden. The proceeds from the sale, after paying off the remaining mortgage balance of $68,000, will allow me to start over somewhere new. I have purchased a small house in Asheville, North Carolina, where I intend to live out my retirement in peace and dignity. Asheville had been Margaret's dream destination. We'd planned to visit there for our 40th anniversary, maybe even retire there someday. Now I was going alone, but somehow that felt right. It would be a fresh start, a place where no one knew me as the sad old widower who let his family walk all over him. I am leaving you the apartment at Riverside Gardens, I wrote, referring to the 1-bedroom rental property I'd owned for 15 years and had never mentioned to them. The rent is $800 per month, utilities not included. The current tenant's lease expires next week, so you can move in immediately if you wish. This was my one concession to guilt. I wasn't leaving them homeless, but I wasn't making it easy for them either. The apartment was small, nothing like the spacious house they'd grown accustomed to, and they'd have to pay rent for the first time in 5 years. The furniture, appliances, and other household items in this house belong to you now as a gift. Consider it compensation for the 5 years of free labor you received from me. I sealed the letter in an envelope and left it on the kitchen table, weighted down with Margaret's old cookie jar. Then I walked through the house one final time, turning off lights and checking that windows were locked. Habits from 32 years of homeownership that died hard. At the front door, I paused and looked back at the living room where Albert had taken his first steps, where we'd celebrated countless birthdays and holidays, where Margaret and I had slow danced to our wedding song on quiet Sunday evenings. But I also saw the room where Sadie had told me I couldn't sit on the new furniture when they had company, where Albert had rolled his eyes when I tried to contribute to conversations about current events, where I'd been made to feel like an intruder in my own life. I locked the door and placed the keys in the mailbox as I'd arranged with the real estate agent. Tomorrow, the Hendersons would pick them up and begin their own life in this house. I hoped they'd be happier here than I'd been these past 5 years. As I drove away, I didn't look back. In my rearview mirror, I could see the porch light glowing, just like it had every night for 32 years. But for the first time in half a decade, I wouldn't be the one coming home to turn it off. I had 6 hours until Albert and Sadie returned from their celebration. By then, I'd be 300 miles away, driving through the night toward a new life where no one would ever again mistake me for the help in my own home. I was somewhere outside of Knoxville when my phone started ringing. It was 3:15 in the morning, and I'd been driving for nearly 6 hours, stopping only for gas and coffee. The mountain roads were dark and winding, but I felt more awake than I had in years. The caller ID showed Albert's name. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately, then again. By the 4th call, I pulled over at a rest stop and turned off the phone entirely. I wasn't ready to hear his voice yet. I needed to reach Asheville first, to see my new home, to make this real before dealing with their reaction. I arrived in Asheville just as the sun was coming up over the Blue Ridge Mountains. The drive had been long, but seeing those rolling hills bathed in golden morning light made every mile worth it. This was where Margaret and I should have come together, but somehow doing it alone felt like keeping a promise to both of us. The house I'd bought was smaller than our old one, but it was mine completely. A 2-bedroom cottage with a wraparound porch and a view of the mountains from the kitchen window. I'd purchased it sight unseen based on photos and a virtual tour, which was either the most reckless or most liberating thing I'd ever done. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Mrs. Coleman, the neighbor who'd been keeping an eye on the place, waving from her garden next door. "You must be Edward," she called out, walking over with a warm smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I've been looking forward to meeting you." For the first time in 5 years, someone was genuinely happy to see me. Not because they needed something from me, not because I was useful to them, but simply because I was a new neighbor to welcome. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it more than she could possibly know. I spent the morning unpacking my 3 suitcases and exploring my new home. The previous owners had left it furnished with simple, comfortable pieces that felt welcoming rather than intimidating. In the kitchen, I made my first cup of coffee and sat at the small table by the window, watching the mountains wake up in the distance. At 10 o'clock, I finally turned my phone back on. I had 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails, all from Albert, except for 3 calls from a number I didn't recognize, which I assumed was Sadie calling from her phone. I listened to the first voicemail, steeling myself for what I knew was coming. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Albert's voice was high with panic. "We came home and there are strangers in the house. They say they bought it. Call me back right now." The second message was angrier. "Dad, this isn't funny. These people have paperwork saying they own our house. They want us to leave. Where are you? Call me back immediately." By the 5th message, Albert's voice had shifted from anger to something approaching desperation. "Dad, please, I found your letter. I don't understand. We can work this out. Just call me back and tell me where you are." The last few messages were barely coherent. Albert was crying in one of them, something I hadn't heard since he was a child. In another, I could hear Sadie in the background, her voice shrill with rage, though I couldn't make out the specific words. I deleted all the voicemails without listening to them completely. Then I blocked both their numbers. For the next 3 days, I ignored the outside world completely. I explored Asheville, walking through the charming downtown area, visiting local shops, eating at small restaurants where the servers actually seemed interested in conversation. I bought groceries for my own kitchen and cooked meals that I ate in peaceful silence, without anyone criticizing my choices or demanding that I clean up their messes afterward. On the fourth day, Mrs. Coleman knocked on my door with a plate of homemade biscuits and some troubling news. "Edward, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but there's been a young man calling around the neighborhood asking about you. He says he's your son and that he's worried about you." My stomach tightened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, of course. I don't know anything about your personal business, and I told him so, but he seemed quite upset. He left his phone number and asked me to have you call him if I saw you." She handed me a piece of paper with Albert's number written on it in unfamiliar handwriting. Seeing it there in someone else's careful script made the whole situation feel suddenly real and final. "Thank you for not giving him any information," I said. Mrs. Coleman studied my face with the kind of perception that comes from decades of life experience. "Are you in some kind of trouble, Edward? Because if you are, there are resources available, people who can help." I almost laughed at the irony. People assuming I was the one who needed help, when for the first time in years, I was exactly where I needed to be. "No trouble," I assured her. "Just some family complications that I'm better off without." She nodded knowingly. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you need. There's no shame in choosing your own peace over other people's drama. That afternoon, I unblocked Albert's number long enough to send him a single text message. "I am safe and well. Do not try to find me. I need space to live my own life. Please respect my decision." His response came within minutes. "Dad, please, we need to talk. I'm sorry. Sadie's sorry. We can fix this. Just tell me where you are." I read his words and felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. No guilt, no wavering, no urge to make everything okay for everyone else at my own expense. Just a clear, calm certainty that I'd made the right choice. I typed back, "The apartment at Riverside Gardens is available. $800 per month. First month's rent is due by the 15th. Take care of yourselves." Then I blocked his number again, this time permanently. That evening, I sat on my new porch, watching the sunset behind the mountains and listening to the sounds of my neighborhood coming alive for dinner. Children playing in yards, families talking over backyard barbecues. The normal sounds of people living their lives without drama or manipulation, or the constant undercurrent of resentment that had poisoned my last 5 years. I thought about Albert and Sadie, probably spending their evening frantically calling relatives, trying to piece together how their comfortable arrangement had collapsed so suddenly. I wondered if they were genuinely sorry, or just sorry that their situation had changed. I wondered if Albert was finally realizing how much he'd taken for granted. But mostly, I found that I didn't wonder about them much at all. 2 weeks later, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. It was from Albert, handwritten on legal pad paper, which told me he was probably writing it late at night when everything felt desperate and urgent. "Dad," it began, "I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what Sadie and I did to you. I understand why you left. I understand that we treated you terribly, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I set the letter aside and made myself a cup of tea before continuing to read it. I wanted to approach his words with a clear head, not the emotional reactivity that had governed so much of my relationship with him over the past 5 years. "We moved into the apartment you left for us," the letter continued. "It's small and expensive and nothing like the house we got used to. Sadie hates it. She says it's beneath us, that you're being cruel and vindictive, but I think I'm starting to understand that it's not about cruelty, it's about consequences." I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Maybe Albert was capable of growth after all. "I miss our Saturday morning breakfasts," he wrote. "I miss our fishing trips. I miss having a father instead of just someone who made my life easier. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I needed you to know that I finally see what I lost." The letter was 3 pages long, filled with memories of our relationship before Sadie, apologies for specific incidents I'd thought he'd forgotten, and promises to do better if I'd give him another chance. At the end, he'd written, "I love you, Dad. I know I stopped showing it, but I never stopped feeling it. If you're willing to try again, I promise things will be different." I folded the letter carefully and put it in the drawer with Margaret's jewelry and my other important papers. Then I walked out to my porch and sat in the rocking chair I'd bought at a local antique shop, watching the mountains fade into purple shadows as evening approached. Albert's letter was everything I'd wanted to hear for 5 years. It was an acknowledgement of his mistakes, a recognition of my worth, a promise that things could change. 6 months ago, receiving those words would have had me packing my bags to rush back and rebuild our relationship. But sitting there in the peaceful twilight of my new life, I realized something important. I didn't need his apology anymore. I'd already moved on. 3 months into my new life in Asheville, I was volunteering at the local community center twice a week, teaching basic financial literacy to seniors who'd found themselves struggling with money management. It was work that felt meaningful in a way I hadn't experienced since retiring from the electric company. On a Tuesday morning in July, while I was helping Mrs. Patterson understand her Medicare statements, the center's director approached me with an expression that immediately put me on alert. "Edward, there's someone here to see you," she said quietly. "A young woman. She says she's your daughter-in-law." My stomach dropped. I'd been living in peaceful anonymity for months, and the idea of Sadie finding me here, in this safe space I'd created, felt like a violation. "I didn't give her any information about you," the director continued, "but she's quite persistent. She says it's a family emergency." Of course she did. I thanked Mrs. Patterson, told her we'd continue next week, and made my way to the lobby with heavy steps. Sadie was standing by the window, looking entirely out of place in her designer clothes and perfect makeup among the casual, comfortable atmosphere of the community center. When she saw me, her face immediately shifted into what I'd learned to recognize as her performance mode. "Edward!" she exclaimed, rushing toward me with her arms outstretched as if we were long-lost relatives reuniting after years apart. "Thank God I found you. We've been so worried." I stepped back before she could embrace me, keeping my voice level and quiet. "How did you find me?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Albert hired a private investigator. We had to make sure you were safe." A private investigator. They'd spent money they didn't have to track me down rather than simply accepting my decision to leave. The fact that this didn't surprise me told me everything I needed to know about how little had really changed. "I'm perfectly safe," I said. "You can see that for yourself. Now you can go home." Sadie's expression shifted to the wounded look she'd perfected over the years. "Edward, we need to talk. There are things you don't understand about our situation. Your situation is not my responsibility anymore." She glanced around the community center, taking in the modest surroundings with barely concealed disdain. "This is where you're spending your time now. Edward, you could be living so much better than this. You could come home, and we could work things out like a real family." Home. She still thought of my house as home, even though it now belonged to the Hendersons and their 2 young children. "I am home," I said simply. Sadie's mask slipped entirely then, revealing the calculating woman I'd learned to recognize underneath the sweet daughter-in-law act. "Fine," she said, her voice hardening. "Let's be honest then. Albert lost his job." The words hit me like a cold shock. "What?" 2 weeks after you left, his company downsized and his position was eliminated. "We're struggling, Edward. Really struggling. We can barely afford the rent on that tiny apartment you stuck us in." I felt a familiar stab of guilt, the same feeling that had kept me trapped for 5 years. But this time, I recognized it for what it was, a conditioned response to their manufactured crises. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "But Albert is a capable man with a good education. He'll find another job." Sadie's eyes flashed with something ugly. "You don't understand. He's been depressed since you left. He blames himself, and it's affecting his ability to interview well. He needs his father's support." "He had his father's support for 34 years, I replied. "He chose to throw it away." "We made mistakes," Sadie said, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "But we're family. Families forgive each other. Families help each other through difficult times." I looked at her standing there in her expensive clothes, using emotional manipulation as naturally as breathing, and I felt something I'd never felt toward her before: pity. "You're right that families help each other," I said, "but they also respect each other. They don't exclude family members from celebrations. They don't treat each other like servants. They don't take and take and take while giving nothing back but contempt." Sadie's composure cracked completely. "You're a selfish old man," she hissed. "We gave you purpose. We gave you a reason to get up in the morning. Without us, what are you? Just another lonely old widower waiting to die." The words were meant to cut, and 6 months ago they would have. But sitting here in this place where I'd found genuine community and meaning, they felt like echoes from someone else's life. "I think you should leave now," I said quietly. "Albert is coming," she said, playing what she clearly thought was her trump card. He's driving down here tomorrow. He wants to see you, to apologize in person. My heart clenched despite myself. Part of me did want to see Albert, to hear his apology, to believe that he'd genuinely changed, but I'd learned the difference between wanting something and needing it. Then I won't be here tomorrow, I said. Sadie stared at me in shock. You'd really avoid your own son? I'd avoid a conversation that would end with me feeling guilty for choosing my own well-being over your problems. I turned to walk away, but Sadie's voice followed me. The apartment lease is up next month, she called out. If you don't help us, we'll be homeless. Is that what you want? Your son living on the streets? I stopped and turned back to her. For just a moment, I saw past her anger and manipulation to something that might have been genuine fear. But I'd spent too many years being responsible for other people's poor choices. Albert is 34 years old, I said. He has a college education, work experience, and family members besides me. If he ends up homeless, it won't be because his father chose to live his own life. That evening I called my sister Patricia in Oregon, something I should have done months ago. Edward, she exclaimed when she heard my voice. Where on earth have you been? Albert's been calling everyone in the family, saying you disappeared. I explained the situation, starting with Margaret's death and ending with Sadie's visit that morning. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or outrage. You did the right thing, she said firmly when I finished. I never liked how that girl treated you when I visited, and Albert should have stood up for you years ago. They say he lost his job. So, lots of people lose jobs. That doesn't give them the right to treat their parents like personal servants. We talked for over an hour, and by the end of the conversation, I felt lighter than I had all day. Patricia invited me to visit her in Portland, and I found myself actually considering it. When was the last time I'd made plans for myself without considering how they might inconvenience Albert and Sadie? The next morning, I drove up to the Blue Ridge Parkway and spent the day hiking trails I'd been meaning to explore. The mountains were beautiful in the summer heat, and I met several other hikers who were friendly and welcoming. One couple, probably in their 70s, invited me to join their weekly hiking group. When I returned home that evening, there was a car I didn't recognize parked in front of Mrs. Coleman's house. Through her kitchen window, I could see her talking with a younger man, whose posture reminded me painfully of Albert. I parked in my own driveway and sat there for several minutes, gathering my courage. Then I got out of my car and walked directly to my front door without looking toward Mrs. Coleman's house. Inside, I made myself a simple dinner and tried to read, but I kept glancing toward the window. Around 8 o'clock, there was a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find Albert standing on my porch, looking older and more tired than I remembered. His clothes were wrinkled and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. "Hi, Dad," he said quietly. We stood there looking at each other for a long moment. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle and helped with homework and worried about through every stage of his life. But he was also the man who'd stood by while his wife treated me like hired help in my own home. "You look good," he said finally. "Healthy." "I am healthy. Mrs. Coleman seems nice. She told me you've been helping at the community center." I nodded, not making this easy for him. Albert's composure cracked slightly. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I needed to say it to your face. I'm sorry for everything." "I know you are. Sadie told me what she said to you yesterday, about being a lonely old widower. That was cruel and wrong." "Yes, it was." He shifted his weight, clearly struggling with what to say next. "I lost my job. I heard. I know you probably think it serves me right." I studied his face, seeing the boy he'd been underneath the worried lines and stubble. "I don't think you deserve to suffer, Albert, but I also don't think your suffering is my responsibility to fix." His eyes filled with tears. "I know I don't have the right to ask, but I need help. Not money," he added quickly, seeing my expression. "Just guidance. I don't know how to be a man without you, and I'm afraid I've forgotten how to be your son." It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, and it broke my heart a little. But it also strengthened my resolve. "You learned how to be a man without me when you chose your wife's comfort over your father's dignity," I said gently. "You can learn how to solve your problems the same way." Albert's shoulders sagged. "So that's it? We're done?" I looked at my son, this man I'd loved and sacrificed for and been disappointed by, and I felt something settle into place inside me. "We're done being the kind of family we were," I said. "Whether we become something different is up to you." 1 year later, I was sitting on my porch on a crisp October morning watching the mountains blaze with fall colors when Mrs. Coleman walked over with a cup of coffee and her usual warm smile. "Mail came early today," she said, settling into the rocking chair I'd bought for visitors. "Looks like you got something from Oregon." Patricia had been true to her word about staying in touch. We'd developed a routine of weekly phone calls and monthly letters, the kind of family relationship I'd forgotten was possible. She was planning to visit for Thanksgiving, our first holiday together in over a decade. "How's the hiking group treating you?" Mrs. Coleman asked. "Good," I said, and meant it. The Tuesday morning hikers had become genuine friends, people who valued my company for who I was rather than what I could do for them. "We're planning a trip to the Smokies next month." "That's wonderful. You seem so much happier than when you first arrived." She was right. I'd lost 20 pounds without trying, mostly because I was active and eating meals I actually enjoyed rather than forcing down food while listening to complaints about my cooking. My blood pressure had improved enough that Dr. Martinez had reduced my medication when I'd visited him during a trip back to handle some business. "Edward," Mrs. Coleman said carefully, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you heard from your son lately?" I had, though not in the way she probably expected. 2 months ago, I'd received a wedding invitation in the mail. Albert was getting remarried, this time to a woman named Jennifer whom I'd never met. The invitation was formal and impersonal, addressed to Mr. Edward Holloway, as if I were a distant relative rather than the groom's father. I'd sent a wedding gift, a nice set of kitchen knives with a card that read, "Wishing you happiness." I never heard back. "He's doing well," I told Mrs. Coleman truthfully. "He found a new job and remarried." "But you weren't at the wedding?" "No, I wasn't invited in any meaningful way." Mrs. Coleman nodded knowingly. She'd raised 4 children of her own and understood family dynamics better than most. "Sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is accepting that they're not capable of loving you back the way you deserve," she said gently. That afternoon, I drove into town for my weekly grocery shopping. The routine had become one of my favorite parts of the week. I shopped at a small market where the staff knew my name and preferences, where I could take my time choosing fresh vegetables and good cuts of meat without anyone complaining about the cost or questioning my choices. As I was loading groceries into my car, my phone rang. The number was familiar but blocked, which meant it was probably Albert calling from work. I'd never blocked his office number, though I rarely answered it. This time, something made me pick up. "Dad?" Albert's voice was tentative, uncertain. "Hello, Albert. I got married last weekend." "I know, congratulations." A long pause. "I wasn't sure if you'd gotten the invitation. I wasn't sure if you'd want to come." "I wouldn't have," I said honestly, "but I hope you're happy." Another pause. "Jennifer's pregnant." The words hit me with unexpected force. I was going to be a grandfather again. Or rather, I already was a grandfather, but this would be the first grandchild born since I'd chosen my own life over theirs. "That's wonderful news," I said, and I meant it. "Dad, I know things between us are complicated, but I want this baby to know their grandfather. Jennifer doesn't understand why we don't talk, and I'm tired of making excuses." I leaned against my car, watching other shoppers go about their daily lives while I processed this unexpected conversation. "What does Sadie think about that?" I asked. "Sadie and I got divorced 6 months ago." Albert's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "She moved back to Sacramento to live with her parents." I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Albert had finally seen through Sadie's manipulation. Sadness that he'd had to learn such a painful lesson, and something that might have been vindication, though I tried to push that feeling aside. "I'm sorry your marriage didn't work out." "I'm not," Albert said quietly. "Dad, I know I can't undo the past 5 years. I know I hurt you in ways that probably can't be forgiven, but I'm trying to be a better man now, and I'd like the chance to be a better son." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. This was the conversation I'd imagined having dozens of times, the apology I'd dreamed of receiving. But now that it was happening, I found myself approaching it with caution rather than relief. "What does that look like to you, Albert? Being a better son?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "Maybe we could start with phone calls. Maybe I could visit sometime, just me, and we could talk. Maybe you could meet Jennifer and the baby when they're born. And if I'm not ready for that, then I'll wait until you are, or I'll accept that you never will be. Dad, I'm not calling to pressure you or guilt you into anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now why you left, and I don't blame you for it." It was the conversation I'd needed to have with him a year ago, but hearing it now felt different than I'd expected. Instead of relief or joy, I felt a calm certainty about my own boundaries. "I'm glad you've learned from your mistakes," I said, "and I'm glad you're starting fresh with someone who treats you better. But Albert, I need you to understand something. I don't need your apology to be happy anymore." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not apologizing to get you back. I'm apologizing because it's true and because I should have said it years ago." That distinction meant more to me than he probably realized.
"The baby will be born in April," Albert continued. "If you'd like to meet them, you're welcome any time. If not, I understand that too." After we hung up, I sat in my car for several minutes thinking about grandchildren and second chances and the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I thought about Margaret and how she would have handled this situation, how she would have balanced her love for Albert with her respect for my dignity. That evening, I called Patricia and told her about Albert's call. "Are you going to see the baby?" she asked. "I'm thinking about it. Maybe when they're older, when I can visit without it being about Albert's guilt or Jennifer's curiosity about the estranged grandfather." "That sounds wise. You don't owe anyone a relationship on their timeline." 6 months later, I received photos in the mail. A beautiful baby girl named Margaret Rose, after her late grandmother. In the photos, Albert looked tired but genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen since before his first marriage. I studied the pictures for a long time, this granddaughter who shared my late wife's name. She had Albert's chin and what looked like my own eyes, though it was hard to tell with babies. I put the photos in a frame on my kitchen table, where I could see them during my morning coffee, but I didn't call Albert to thank him for sending them. I wasn't ready for that level of connection yet, and I'd learned that being ready was a requirement I was allowed to have. Instead, I opened a savings account at the local bank and began making monthly deposits. When Margaret Rose was old enough to need college funding or a car or help with a first apartment, the money would be there. But it would come with no strings attached, no expectations of gratitude or relationship, just the quiet love of a grandfather who'd learned the difference between helping and enabling. On my 65th birthday, I threw myself a small party. Istash. Coleman came, along with 3 couples from my hiking group and 2 women from the community center where I still volunteered. We ate cake on my porch and watched the sunset over the mountains, and nobody mentioned anything I should be doing differently or anyone I should be including who wasn't there. That night, as I was cleaning up the dishes, I realized something that would have shocked the man I'd been 2 years ago. I was genuinely happy. Not the conditional happiness that depended on other people's approval or the absence of conflict, but the deep, quiet satisfaction that comes from living according to your own values. I thought about the letter I'd left on that kitchen table so long ago, about the scared and angry man who'd written it while his family celebrated without him. That man had been breaking apart, but he'd had the courage to put himself back together differently. I still miss Margaret every day, but I'd learned to carry that grief alongside joy rather than letting it define my entire existence. I still loved Albert, but I'd learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting their poor treatment. I still had moments of loneliness, but I discovered the difference between being alone and being lonely. My phone was on the counter, and I could see that I had a voicemail from an unknown number. It might have been Albert calling from somewhere new. It might have been Sadie trying one more manipulation. It might have been a telemarketer. I deleted it without listening. Tomorrow, I would wake up in my own home, make my own breakfast, and spend my day doing things that brought me satisfaction and peace. I would volunteer at the community center, tend my small garden, maybe drive up to the mountains for a hike. In the evening, I might call Patricia or read a book or simply sit on my porch and watch the world go by. It was a quiet life, a simple life, but it was entirely mine. And after 65 years of trying to be the man everyone else needed me to be, that felt like the greatest victory of all. Standing there in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a birthday celebration where everyone who attended genuinely wanted to be there, I finally understood what Margaret had been trying to tell me in those last difficult months of her illness. Edward, you deserve to be loved for who you are, not for what you can do for other people. It had taken me 2 years and a new life to really hear those words. But I was listening now, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, that was enough.